React Native Firebase Firestore allows us to connect up our React Native application to Google's Cloud Firestore, which is a real-time NoSQL database. We're going to take a look at it, as well as creating collections, viewing them and accessing them, as well as making documents. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. This video is part of a series, so you'll need to make sure that you have the React Native Firebase app module installed to continue on. I'll link this in the description as well as above here. Otherwise, if you do, we can move on to the first step. Also, if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump back into it. We'll start by installing the library, and in order to do this, we're going to run yarn add at React Native Firebase /Firestore. This will install the library for us to use, and this is the only step we need to do, but be aware that you might hit the 64K limit on Android, and if you are, you'll have to enable multidexing, which I've done a video on just up here. Also be aware that whenever you're doing any stuff on React Native Firebase, it's always good to make sure that all your versions are in sync, so that when you're going through new versions of Firebase, you're keeping them all up to date at the same level. If you're running iOS, you're going to also need to install the pods for this. So what you're going to have to do is cd into iOS and run pod install. This will install all the dependencies required for iOS, but in our case, we're simply using Android, so we can exit out of this. We can also access the Firestore cloud system directly by going to console.firebase.com and going to our Firebase project. In here, we'll be able to access our store, and this is just here on the side under, I believe, let's take a quick look, just under database. And here under database, we should be able to get access to all the collections and documents we'll be now creating and using. With all of this done, we can now run our React Native application by passing in npx react-native run-android in our console. Let's hit enter on that and build our development copy here. Next, we'll have a look at cleaning up this file here and start using the Firebase Firestore module. We're going to jump into Firebase Firestore and we're going to create a new database. In here, we're just going to do a test mode where we'll just be writing some basic information. This is the security rules where you essentially define who can read and write to the database. And normally in production mode, you have to specifically advise who has those permissions, but we're just going to run it in test mode where anyone can edit this. And for more information about doing security, you can check out the Firebase documentation. Let's create this database, and in this case, we're just going to set a location, and my location here is Australia. So I'm going to select Australia Southeast here and click done. Great, so now that that's done, we'll be able to access this in our React Native application. What we're going to do is we're going to import the Firebase console the Firebase Firestore module here. So we're going to run import Firestore from, and we're going to pass in at React Native Firebase Firestore. There, we'll have that imported, and now we can call it. So for example, we could call to grab a collection or a document, but we haven't defined any yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into Cloud Firestore and we're going to create one just so that we can test accessing it. Here we have our React Native Firebase Firestore collections, and we haven't got one yet, so we're going to create one called users here. We'll click next and we'll create our first document. So the auto ID will generate an ID for us here, and here in the field I'm going to do name, and in here I'm going to pass in Adrian Tuareg. We'll save that, and that should be it for now. We should see this pop up with all our users. We could create another document in here with an auto-generated details, and in here I might create a second user with the name of test. Let's save both of these, and we can jump back into our application now. And what we can do is we can call Firestore and grab the current users on here. So what I might do is I might pass in const user document is equal to Firestore, and in here we'll pass in the method collection, and we're going to grab the collection users. And in here I want to grab a single doc. And the doc will be the ID for my user. So this is this one over here. I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. Finally, we'll want to add a get method here. So that'll actually get the document. This will return a promise, so if we want the actual result, we'll have to pass in a wait. Let's create a function for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to call getUser, and this will be an async function in our app. And we're going to pass this in, and we're going to pass it in a constructor as well. And this constructor will call getUser every time we load it up. So let's give that a shot. We're going to pass in this .getUser. And finally with this, we might save that against state or something else, but for the time being, we're just going to console log it out. So I'm just going to console log user document, and we're going to see if that pops up in our debugging tools. I'm going to refresh the application over here, and we're going to expand that out, and we can see that we did get some data back, and it's got our object here with the name of Adrian Twarek. So it looks like that all worked. So this right now only gives us a single read, and it's not real time. So in order for this to be a real-time database, we're going to have to change up a little bit of how it works. We're going to set a new item in here, and we're going to call this .subscriber. And what we're going to do is pass in some functionality here to essentially create a snapshot that gets automatically updated every time we're essentially updating that user object. So what we're going to do is grab Firestore in here, and we're going to grab the collection once again for the users. And we're going to grab the single document that we have like we did previously. But in this case, we're not going to get it. We're going to call a method called onSnapshot. And when we call onSnapshot, then what we're going to do is we're going to be listening for any state changes to this collection document. And that way, if it does change, we're going to update our document here, or our application. So let's grab the doc here, and we're going to do onSnapshot. And we might create a state for this document, because right now we're not really saving this. So I'm going to do some empty state in here, and this will be our user document, and our user document here will essentially just have the name, which for the time being will be empty. We'll pass the name in here as this .state.user.name. And if we save that right now, we won't see anything happen just yet. It'll be empty. But what we can do now is we can call this .setState. And in here, what we'll do is we'll update the user.name, and we'll set the new name to essentially equal the doc name. So that should automatically update with Adrian Twarek. If we hit save on that and refresh our application, we should see that update. The only other thing we need to do here is pass in the method data, and that'll actually grab the data from our doc. Otherwise, it's grabbing the whole subscription snapshot. So we can see that that's updated. My name is appearing up here, which is pretty cool. But what's even more awesome is that we can jump into Firebase now, and we could edit my name and just have Adrian in there. And as soon as we hit update, we can see that our app has updated that automatically as well. We can also put this back in, and we'll notice that our application is updating live. So now this data is essentially real time. Be aware that with Firebase, they actually calculate all the types of reads and writes you do to your database, as well as the subscriptions and everything like that. So make sure that you optimize this as best as you can and cache it when available, because it will use your quota, and there is a section to which you might have to start paying for the amount of utilization that you use. But for basic stuff like this, it should be okay. Now that we've sorted out grabbing data and documents, what we're going to do is have a look at snapshots. They essentially return a query of results from Firebase, and we can do this to grab documents or queries, and we're going to test this out by grabbing our collection here for users and essentially printing that out in a for each loop. So I'm going to actually just grab this function here and go through how it works. We're going to place this here in our constructor and just console log it out. The essential reason this is used is to be able to get some more information about what's going on. So in this case, we want to grab a snapshot of the collection for users, and then we're going to pass this out. We're going to console log out how many users we have, and then we're going to go through the actual items of our users and print out the IDs of the actual data itself. Let's hit save on this and we'll open up our console here. And when we do and refresh our application, we'll be able to see this snapshot has posted out a total of 2 users here. And we can have a look at their IDs as a quick example of their object details here, which has their variable for name and the name itself. So this is just a quick example of how we can use snapshots to pull data out really quickly. We can also do this for documents as well, and we just pass in the document and call the document snapshot here, and we can check whether the document exists and we can grab the data in there and all sorts of other stuff. So it's really good to learn a little bit more about how you can utilize snapshots, but for the time being, that should be enough to get you up and running. Next, we'll have a look at how we can start creating some more interesting queries for our documents where we're calling specific information. And to be able to do that, we are going to have to create some additional information in here. I'm going to add a field here called age, and this is going to be a number where I'm just going to pass in a number in general, and we'll create one here for our test document as well. So for both of these, I'm just going to put in some basic details, and we're going to test out how we can create some queries where we grab specific information from Firebase. What we're going to do is we're going to call this query here where we're going to do a where select. And this where will check the age and see if you're under or over 18 or 25 or whatnot, and pull back results specifically for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into Firebase here, and we're going to go to this section where we're getting users. But in this case, we're going to change this method up. We're going to call get users, and in here, instead of grabbing a single document, we're going to do that where command. And for this where command, we're going to pass it in here, and we're going to essentially check where users are essentially an age of maybe 18 or more. So let's go age here, and we'll pass in greater than, and we'll also pass in the variable for 18. Once we do, we'll be able to get all the data back in here, and these will be called our user documents. Or maybe just call this users. So I'm going to console log this out for the time being, and I'm going to call it here in our constructor. We're going to check our console to see what we get back. When we open up our console, we can see that users has been printed out here. And if we expand that out, we can go to our docs, and we've only got a single one here. And in our array, we've got the data here for Adrian, which is 30. So it looks like that's all working. But we could also do a less than sign, and we can do less than 25. If we check back on our console here, we can see that this has been printed out once more. If we go to our docs there, we can see that this time our test user has shown up. If we have more docs in here, they should print out, but this is an example of how we can query different bits of data through Firebase through our methods over here. There are other filters we can apply, such as limiting how many results we get back, or even ordering them by the age in descending order. But these are just a couple of examples, and you can check them out on the documentation. What I really like is being able to start and end at specific results. So that way you can have a certain page number where you're only showing the first 5 results and then the next 5. And this is an example of how you can do that. But what we're going to take a look at next is how to write some documents to our Firestore so we can add some new users and maybe even remove or edit them through React Native directly. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of most of this code and reorganize how we're grabbing users. So right now we were grabbing a collection here from Firebase, and in this collection we're grabbing a single document. But what I want to be able to do now is actually grab a list of the documents in that collection. So we're going to run this command a little bit different. Instead of a single user here, we're going to do users as an array. And in here, instead of setting this state like this, we're actually going to map through all the documents in here. So we'll rename this to documents, and we'll do a for each loop. For this for each loop, we're going to map out the document, and we're going to create a basic users object in here. And for this basic users document object, we're going to just have an array. And this array will just push out all the documents that we have on here. So we'll do a doc.data, and this will be pushed into our array. So here we'll go users.push and pass that in. Finally, we'll set this as state. So we'll go this.state, set state, and in here we'll pass in users will be users. Beautiful. With that all done, we'll be able to just test out that this works properly. So I'm going to hit save and make sure that we're not getting any errors. So I'm just going to remove these two over here. And finally, let's make sure that everything is working here okay. We'll pass in some text and save that, and we should see that it works properly. Yep. Finally, what we can do is double check that our set state has worked. So we're going to console log out users just to make sure that they're showing up. And if we have a look here, we can see our 2 users are showing up. So I can map these out now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to call this.set this.state.map or this.state.users.map, and we're going to get each user and map them out into an individual view with some details such as the username. So username can be mapped in here. We'll also pass in a key, and for the time being I'm just going to use index, but normally I would recommend the document ID because that's a much better way to do things. So I'm going to save that, and we can see our 2 users have appeared there. So what we're going to do now is add a document here to our users table, and to do this we're going to create a button here below, and this button, what we'll have is just a title called maybe add random user or something like that. And what we want to do is create a function, and this function will create our random user. So what I'm thinking is add random user can be an async function that we call. And in here, we'll be doing some Firebase Firestore functions. So let's just do onPress, and this will call this.add random user. Now this random user, I want us to be able to essentially generate a random name. So let the name equal something extremely random like math.random, and maybe we'll pass in here to string 36 and substring 7. So this will just generate a random number of characters for us to use as a name. Now, in order for us to be able to put this into Firebase, we're going to call Firebase here, and we're going to grab the collection here for users. And for this users collection, we're going to run the command add. In here, we'll pass in some data. So in this case, the name, which will be the name we're generating, and the age. And the age I might just do at 20. And I've just called that Firebase instead of Firestore. So I'll just update the name for that and refresh once more. We'll select this button, and we can see that our test user has been created there. If we select it again, we can see another one has. And if we jump into Firebase here and we go to our database, we can see that these have been created as well. So that looks like it's all good. We can also delete this document here. So I'm just going to delete it, and it should disappear from our app as well. Using the same sort of syntax, we can grab documents and update single properties from them, as well as delete them as well if we want to. So these are all options available, and the commands pretty much follow the same structure. So you can check this out in the documentation. We're going to take a look at transactions now, and they're a way to ensure that writes occur with the latest information on our server. They're not essentially done until we've done a read first, and it makes sure that the write is successful by the end of the transaction. And this is useful when we're doing high processing on very large scale websites, and this is where if a transaction essentially fails, it's run again until it succeeds, or it doesn't run if there are certain issues in that situation. So for example, transactions won't work if a client is offline, but they will work if everything is done properly. So we're going to have a look at this example over here, which is to post a like, and we're going to modify it and see how we can get it to run on our system. What we're going to do is we're going to put this into our app here, and instead of a post ID, we're going to pass in a user ID. And the user ID we're going to grab is just here for Adrian Tuareg, and I'm just going to replace this straight up with a user ID here, and we're going to grab this from our users document. So essentially what we're going to be doing here is getting the user reference, and this is going to be grabbed from the Firestore collection here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call Firestore here and run a transaction. And this transaction will be an asynchronous event so that we can grab the data in first. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be grabbing that user reference, and we're going to do this by calling it over here. And this will give us a post snapshot. And this will check whether our user actually exists or not. So I'm just going to change this to user does exist. If it doesn't, it's not going to do anything and it's going to throw an error. But if the user does exist and the data is correct, what we can do is we could update the age here. And instead of the current age, we could increase the age by 1. So this gives us an example of how this works. So in this case, I'm just going to update the user reference over here. And finally, we'll save that. I'm just going to remove that over here, and we're going to have to close off this function. And in this case, this function normally essentially works by having a then, and it console logs out that it's been successful, or console logs out an error. But we won't worry about any of that, and we're going to replace our button here with add random user to onPost like. We're also going to pass in our user.age so that we can see that Adrian Twarog's age increases by 1 every time we call this transaction. So I'm going to hit it over here, and we can see that the number is increasing, but this only happens after it successfully reads the data to make sure that it exists. So this is an example of how transactions work. So now we're going to get to the fun part, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a batch request. For this batch request, we might delete all the users we have on here. So I'm going to actually just copy over this function over here. We're going to paste this in and have a look at it. What we're going to do is we're going to call mass delete users, and we'll call this as an async function. What I want to be able to do is grab a snapshot essentially of all our users here. So let's update that. And when we get these, we're going to also call a batch. And this is by running Firestore batch here. What we're going to do is with this user query, we're going to grab all the documents and we're going to for loop them. And for each one of them, we're going to call batch here and we're going to delete them. And this will pass in the document reference here. Once we've created this batch of deletes, we're going to pass that back in and commit to it. So we're going to save that and just run it as is. I'm going to apply this here to our button. We're going to pass that through. So when we hit this button, we're going to be deleting all our users. Here we go. There, they're all gone. And this is an example of how you can batch data together in a single request so that you don't have to collect it in general. And sometimes you might want to do this when you're doing large requests. You can do other requests with batch as well, such as updates and stuff, but this is just an example of deleting data. Finally, be aware that Firestore comes with out-of-the-box offline ready mode. So this means that your data is persisted even when you're in offline mode. And if you don't want this to happen, you can manually override it. And you can do this by calling Firestore and calling the method settings. In here, we can pass in an object. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to pass in persistence. And we're going to set that to false. And by doing so, we're not going to have our data persisted even when we're in offline mode. And this is useful sometimes when you don't want users to make changes when they are offline. This is just a quick overview of Cloud Firestore for React Native, and there's lots more you can do with it, as well as even jumping into the Firestore system here on Google and having a look at some of the cool stuff that you can utilize, because it essentially integrates with the web, with your apps, and with lots of other mediums, and it's a really useful tool to be able to use. Anyway, my name is Adrian, and I do videos around design and development, so if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.